Welcome to Built for This. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe. My podcast features captivating conversations with intriguing people who have found purpose in their lives through their career, family, or life experiences, and just why they were built for this. Through the stories that you will hear, I trust that you will be inspired and encouraged to find just what you were built for. So let's get started. Well, welcome again to another edition of Built for This, and it is a real honor for me to get to visit with Rick Villarreal. Lots of athletics background we're going to talk about, and Fellowship of Christian Athletes. Rick, thanks for joining me on the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure and a blessing. I appreciate it.
You know, before we get to FCA, which we're both a part of right now, I'd like to go back. You have quite a bit of an athletics on the coaching side, administration side after your days when you were in school, but that's not really how you started. I mean, you were looking at the business world and pizzas and that kind of thing. And so, as a young college graduate, what was your vision at that time?
You know, it's interesting. I went to school to be an accountant, and that's what my background is in accounting when I came out of college. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. And I went to work at the Mississippi Power Company there in Gulfport, where I was from. And they put me in the payroll department, and after 6 months, I said, I can't do this anymore. It just doesn't fit my personality. It just wasn't what I wanted to do. So I went to work for a local, in my opinion, pizza company at that time. A guy had just started. He had 5 stores, and he was doing fairly well, and he was looking for somebody to run his office. Mm-hmm. And so I said, you know, they interviewed me, and they said, do you think you could do this? I said, yeah, I do believe I could. And so we did, and we grew immensely over a period of time. I think in 3 years we had 88 stores in Mississippi, and it was a chain you probably hear of now, Domino's Pizza. But at that time,
I've heard of them.
It was not even a national thing. Mm-hmm. And I went to work for them and went to work in the office and was doing great. And one day they came in and said, we got to talk. And we had a talk, and they told me that, you know, I was doing a great job, except that I didn't realize I was supposed to pay the taxes, that I was responsible for paying taxes.
Oh.
And so they brought me in and said, "Hey, guess what? We owe this money, and we're gonna have to move on." And I said, "Well, I understand that, you know. And sometimes sometimes failure is a result of not even knowing, and you wonder what's the next step. And for me, failure is always a step to success. I don't think you can ever have great success without failures. I don't know anybody that's had a great success that hasn't seen a failure or two. So what ended up happening is I ended up going into the pizza stores. Learn how to make pizzas. And after a year, my little brother and I decided we were going to go out on our own, moved to a small town, Decatur, Alabama. He picked it. I don't know why. There were only 35,000 people there and 5 other pizza places. Okay. And so it was a little scary at first. I packed up my family in a U-Haul, had a daughter at that time, drove them up, and we started business. And I'm big about personal relationships. So when we started, there was a rule within the company that you had to spend $3,000 on marketing. Most people bought TV, radio, newspaper, whatever it might be. I said, no, we're not going to do that. We're gonna buy $3,000 worth of dough and pepperoni and cheese, and we're going to make pizzas, and we're going to give them away. And we did that for a month. We just made pizzas, and we made sure they were on time, that they were hot, that they were the right way. And our hope at that time, this is back in 1981, that we could just do about $12,000 a week in sales. And if we could do that, we could pay each of us the $400 a week.
That's big living right then.
If we did that, we could give ourselves a $500 bonus, and we were going to be in high cotton, right? Yeah. And so we prepared ourselves, and hoping that we would do 14 or 15 that first week, and that we'd open the doors and did $37,000 of pizza sales in 1 week.
Wow!
At that time, it was a national sales record for the company, and we got calls from the president of the company. What are y'all doing down there? What's happening? We had people from all over the country that we knew. We're going to come in and see what you're doing, and we said, don't show up this week because we sold 37,000 last week. We might not sell 1 this week, you know. But it was a little amazing. We had created this real contact with the community. The next week we stayed right at 30,000, then 27, and that store stayed at about 26 for about 7 weeks. And I looked at my little brother and said, we got to open another store. Mm-hmm. And in a little less than 3 months, we opened a second store on the other side of town, and hoping that they would split the sales. We could have 2 stores doing $14,000 a month, and that'd be awesome. And what happened was that the first ones kept doing $20,000 a week, and the second one did 16, and we could give better service. And from that, we bought a store that from a young man that was up the road, wasn't doing well. Then we bought 3 more stores on over in Muscle Shoals area, and before we knew it, we had 8 stores. And at 27 years old, I was making 6 figures. driving an Audi 300 with a phone in it and living life large, you know.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy to think about it now. But I never thought at that particular time when I left and had that discussion about my job and leaving that job that it would turn into something that was better. And I'm just a big believer. You know, Jeremiah 29:11 is my favorite Bible verse, for I know the path I have for you. And as a person, I could never write kind of where my story went, where my life went. But he did.
Yeah.
And so I'm living large and having a great time. And all of a sudden one day I'm sitting at my desk in my office and thinking how I can spend the next $100,000, you know, and buying more stores or wherever it might be. And something said, this is not what you're supposed to be doing. Mm-hmm. You need to move on. This is not something that's great. It's going to put you in a position to be able to do some things that you need to do, but you need to move on. I really didn't.
How hard was that to come to that?
Well, you know, it's tough because you got a nice car and make a nice salary and not worried about a lot of stuff, so it's tough. And so I said, nah, you know, that's okay. That's just a bad message. And so I just kind of waited. Well, about a month later, I got the same message. You know, you need to move on. It's time to move on. And so I came home and told my wife, I said, listen, I'm getting out of the pizza business we're selling out, and I'm going to go be a high school football coach.
How'd that go over?
I'd been an athlete my whole, you know, I'd been a four-sport athlete in high school and pretty good football player, pretty good, won a state tennis championship. But my dad was my first coach. And between him and a friend of his, they created this, not a passion for the sport, but a passion for serving, a passion for giving back. I mean, they didn't get paid. You know, we're some knucklehead little fourth and fifth and sixth graders playing Pee Wee football, and they showed up every afternoon after working all day and gave back to us. And I saw the joy that gave them. I saw the satisfaction that created for them. So that's what I was going to do. I went back to the University of Southern Mississippi, where I'd been a student and got my undergraduate degree, and had been involved with the football program for just a short period of time. I wasn't a really good player, but when I went back, the guy that was a quarterback at the time when I was in school, a guy named Jeff Bauer, was the offense coordinator. He saw me on campus and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I told him. He said, "Why don't you come out and work with us? You can get some knowledge and get some experience. It'll help you in looking for a job." And so I went to work for 16 hours a day, cutting up film and drawing cards for the grand total of zero, not making a dime, but loving it. I mean, just loving, absorbed by it. And you've been around me. I get kind of absorbed when I get into something. So I went full speed ahead, 100%. And after about a year and a half, or after really about 8 months, they asked me to come on as a graduate assistant rather than go find a job. And I did that. And about 6 months in, my head coach got the job at LSU, and he was taking 4 of the staff members. And you know, I was just a graduate assistant. I wasn't going. I mean, I was just kind of. So they all left, and we went to a bowl game that year. I was very fortunate to be at Southern Miss when a guy named Brett Favre was there, and we won a lot of ball games. And but we played that bowl game, and it was a thriller, and we got beat at the very end. But it was in Birmingham, Alabama, so I drove back to Hattiesburg, and I realized when I laid my head on the pillow that night that I didn't have a job. You know, my head coach was gone. I didn't have a job. What was I going to do? And so we just trusted. You know, we just prayed and trusted about that. And about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call at 2 o'clock in the morning from the head coach at LSU and says, "Hey, I want you to come and be on our staff," which was unbelievable to me. I grew up in the Southeastern Conference. You know, I mean, I was a Southern Miss guy, but kind of grew up wanting to go to Auburn and had been around Southeastern Conference football. So to go to LSU is like, you know, I'm going to the Mecca.
Yeah,
I'm going to the Holy Land. Yeah. And you know, I got there, and when I walked in the first day, he asked me, he said, "When can you be here?" I said, "As soon as I can get in my car."
Yeah, get the car started.
And I drove up, and when I walked in, he said, "Now, before you take this job, I want you to look around." And I was shocked. In 1991, LSU might have had the worst facilities. I had just come from Southern Miss, who had struggling facilities. Mm-hmm. And, you know, other than the fact that Death Valley was a big place, the rest of the facilities were unbelievably bad. Student athletes, great kids. I love them to this day, stay in touch with a lot of them, but looked terrible. We took pictures of them. It was the worst looking football team I'd seen in a long time. And so I was like, is this what is this what we signed up for? And he said, "And I can pay you $16,000 a year."
Okay.
Wow, that's better than zero. So that's kind of how I kind of got my start.
And then we're going to talk a little bit about LSU and then TCU, and you eventually make your way to University of North Texas. But going from, you talked about in the pizza business and going from driving the fancy car and having the money and all that to all of a sudden going to college athletics, working for nothing. But the point I guess I'm trying to think is the servant's attitude, the servant's heart that I know that you have started to surface there. Did you notice that at that time, that this is really kind of what I'm about?
Yeah, that's kind of how we were brought up. You know, we if you measure this by today's standards, we were below the poverty line. I had 5 brothers. We lived in a house that's probably big enough for 4 people, and you know, we converted the garage into a den, and 2 of us slept in there, and we shared bedrooms. But we never knew that we were that way. We never knew we were poor. We never knew that. You know, my dad was always around, playing football in the street with us, or you know, my mom worked in the cafeteria, so I could go to Catholic school. I always knew what I was getting home going to have for dinner every night because that's what we had for lunch. So whatever we had, you know, that's what we were going to do. But my mom and dad spent hours and hours and hours across the street at the Knights Columbus Hall, helping with fundraising events or catering receptions and those kind of things, which was part of the Knights Columbus mission there, and they just served people. And you know, so going back to school and kind of getting back to reality, that really kind of for me was getting back in the setting that I was used to. I felt really good about the fact that there were young men that I went out and worked with every day. Some that had real trouble, some that were struggling, some that we actually had to let go. One that we let go and brought back, and what a great story. But you know, we had to let him go because he wouldn't go to class and wouldn't do what he was supposed to. And kid ended up being a 2-time academic All-American and a 3-time All-Conference player because we were able to help him understand what the real things in life were. And so for me, it was, you know, you could say it was a change in life from a monetary standpoint, but from a satisfaction standpoint, not even close.
Other than the facilities that you were welcomed with welcomed by at LSU, what was that like being on the staff?
Well, you know, I love Baton Rouge and I loved LSU. Yeah. We still have tremendous friends there. Yeah. You know, it's one of the premier programs in the country. No matter how bad the facilities were, it's still, you know, when people say LSU, but we love the food, unfortunately too much probably. We loved living there, that part of the country. My grandmother's from New Orleans, and I used to stay there a lot with her, so the Louisiana culture was in me. I'm a big Cajun cook and love cooking Cajun food and eating Cajun food, so it was a great place for me. The only problem with LSU was we didn't win as much as we needed to. And, you know, one of the things I learned about fortitude is that, you know, my head coach, Curly Hallman, he went there and didn't have a lot of success, and he took a lot of flack. But I know what he did there. I know he changed the culture. I know that he got rid of some young people that didn't need to be a part of that program, and he helped bring in some kids that changed that program down the road. You know, when Nick Saban showed up 3 years later, the cupboard wasn't bare. You know, we had started the process of bringing in kids like David LaFleur, who played here for the Cowboys, but Eddie Kennison and Denard Walker. You can go across. There's probably, 35, 40 kids we recruited during that time. Alan Faneca, who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame now, he brought those kids in, and he changed that program. And so I learned part of my transition when I came to North Texas was, you know, sometimes you're going to have to take the heat. Yeah. Sometimes you're going to have to say, I'm going to do things that people are just going to laugh at you and go, okay, whatever. Yeah. But you stick with it and you do the things that you know are right. And he did that. You know, he made his mistakes. We made our mistakes. But overall, you know, he did so much for that program. It's unbelievable.
And we'll talk about North Texas, but on that point right there, the pressure that coaches feel all the time, in and out of the season, and it's all based on one-loss record most of the time. But, you know, I know you're a big believer of investing in young people's lives, and not just for 2 or 3 or 4 years that they might be in the university, but for their eternity of their life. But was that something you took very strongly, not just as a coach on the staff, but that you needed to be there as a man for a young man who might be looking for a lot more than just playing time on the field?
In 2 ways. One, you know, the young men that played for me in the position that I coached and worked with, they were at my house on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. You know, we'd have them over for dinner. That probably was a rules violation at the time, and I didn't even realize it. But, you know, it wasn't like we were trying to give them an extra benefit. It was really just creating family. That today, that's a normal thing in college athletics. You talk to people like Gino Auriemma and talks about that family atmosphere you create by having those young people. You know, you saw the things on Nick Saban all the time where he'd have the kids out to his boathouse or whatever. And, you know, that was important to me that we do that. But it wasn't just about football players. A very good friend of mine, Jerry Baldwin, who was coaching linebackers that time at LSU and is now a pastor in South Louisiana, came to me one day and he said, "Hey, I noticed you're a little bit late for Sunday meetings sometimes. How do you get away with that?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to church." And I told Curly, if I'm going to lose my job because I can't go to church, then I'm probably going to lose my job. Mm-hmm. And it was okay. And he said, "Well, that's why I want to come to you, because I want to start an FCA at LSU." There was no FCA at LSU at the time. And so we had our first meeting, and he was all excited, and about 7 kids showed up, and I think he was a little disappointed. He wasn't a quitter, but he was a little disappointed. And he said, "You know, we got to find a way." I said, "I can find a way." And when you get to LSU, when you're first there, whatever you need, you get. Yeah. You know, so I called the local McDonald's guy and I said, "Hey, I need 100 hamburgers." He said, "What?" I said, "I need 100 hamburgers. Can you get them to me next Wednesday night?" He said, "Sure." So we went and picked up the 100 hamburgers, and we posted deals up and said, "Hey, we have an FCA meeting, free food." Right? And we had about 52 kids show up.
There.
Oh, yeah. Everybody showed up. Everybody wanted hamburgers, and they came. And we had pizza a couple weeks later. But before we left, we had almost 500 kids coming to FCA on a regular basis. And for me, it was about sharing not just about life and how things are important, what to keep in perspective, but that, our problems are just they're just minimal. You know, we create a lot of our own problems and our own pain. I tell people all the time, the pain you're feeling right now, that's your hand in the door Jesus is trying to close. Mm. God's trying to close that door, and you just won't let it go. You know, if you'll take your hand out, the pain will go away, and He'll open another door. And for us, well, a lot of those kids that gave their lives to Christ at that time and took it, you could see the change in the classroom. You could see the change on the field. You know, you always knew when a kid was not doing well in some area of his life because on the field it was reflected. Yeah. When he was doing well, he got to be a better player right away because his mind wasn't somewhere else. You know, it was at peace. And so, that was important to me. It's always, and that, you know, like I said, it comes from my mom and dad, but it's been a part of everything I've done. I have 5 brothers, and I have 4, and 1 passed away, but they're all exactly the same.
You professionally get an opportunity eventually to come to North Texas, to come to be an athletics director here. How did that come about, first of all, and then your thoughts about, well, I may go to Denton, Texas, to be an athletics director.
You know, that was never really in the plan. My plan originally. I was coaching at Southern Miss at the time, and I'd gone back and was I'd gone from LSU to TCU, worked with Pat Sullivan there for 3 years, and then Jeff Bauer called me. We got fired at TCU. You know, I tell people all the time, if you've never been fired, just go be a coach, because there's 2 kinds of coaches. One's been fired and one's getting ready to get fired. That's just how it is. Yeah. You know, but he got fired, and I got a call from Jeff Bauer, and he said, "I got a spot. Do you want to come back?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to get back to my alma mater and be a part of that program." Mm-hmm. And I coached for about a year and a half, and I had some alums come to me and said, "Hey, we'd like for you to move into administration." And I said, "Well, I didn't realize I was that bad a coach." And they said, "No,
we'd like to
that's not it. That's not it. We need help. Yeah. We need facilities. We need funding, and we know you're capable of doing that kind of stuff." So I did. I moved into a spot that opened up as a senior associate athletic director, and I applied and got the spot. And the first thing I did was go to our athletic director, who was a really nice guy, Coach McClellan, but he was an older guy, and he was kind of set in his ways. Mm-hmm. And I went in and said, "We need to raise some money. We need to build some facilities." He said, "Well, you can't raise money at Southern Miss." And I said, "Well, I think I can." And so I took about 6 of these guys who'd come to me, and I said, "I need you to bring these other 4 guys that I know." And I brought them to a meeting one night, and I said, "Here's the deal. We all agree, right? We need new facilities. We got to get better at this. We got to do this. We got to do this." And they all kept shaking their head, yes. And I said, "Okay, then every one of you needs to give me $100,000. And that's when the heads stopped doing this, sure. Right? Uh-huh. And it was like, "Oh, you know, we can't do that." That's the issue, Ken. I know every one of you. Every one of you is capable. And you're the ones that are yelling loudest that it needs to be done. So if you don't step in, how's everybody else going to do this, right?" And so that night, 10 of them signed an agreement. I said, "Now I'm going to give you 4 years to pay it, because we can finance a building longer than that, but I'm going to give you 4 years to pay it." And so they all signed an agreement that night. So in one night, we raised $1 million. Wow. And I said, now that you've done that, I need you to do one more thing. And they said, "We just gave you $100,000. I need you to bring me 20 of your friends." right? And so in a short period of time, we had about 48 guys who gave 100, or families, I don't want to say guys, that gave $100,000, raised almost $5 million, and built a brand new athletic center, which changed the program tremendously. And at the same time, I'm a big college baseball fan. I hated that when I came to North Texas that they didn't have a baseball program, and I'll talk about that later because I never was told we didn't.
Yeah.
But the baseball program is one of the best in the country. Leads in the top 10 in attendance. But at that time, we just had really bad facilities over there too. So we raised another $750,000 to build a new baseball clubhouse, locker room, and some upgrades to the stadium. And after that happened, I got a couple of calls. The first one was actually from the University of Texas San Antonio, and I went and interviewed for that job. And I think there were about 18 people in the process. And I got down to the final two. They brought two of us in for a final interview. I thought I had a great interview with everybody and had lunch with the president and talked to him. And I thought that went great. And I got home, and the other person who I know very well is a good friend of mine. She ended up getting the job. And I was like, wow, I wonder what happened. I need a call, because if there was something in the interview that I did wrong, when you're applying for one of only 108 jobs in the country, what differentiates you? What puts you in that position? And so I called her and I said, hey, congratulations. She goes, no, thank you. I said, what do you mean, thank me? And she goes, I wouldn't get the job if it wasn't for you. And I said, well, wait a minute, what did I do? And she said, well, everybody loved you. I mean, the athletes loved you, the coaches loved you, the faculty you met with loved you. And then you had lunch with the president, and he asked you one question: what would you do to change this program if you could do it tomorrow? Well, I was in San Antonio, Texas, large population. All they have in San Antonio is professional basketball. And I said, you need to add football. Oh. If you'll add football, it'll change the dynamic of this institution. Unbeknownst to me, he did not want football. Oh. He wanted a world-class soccer team, and like if I ask you who won the men's soccer championship last year, you probably can't tell me, right?
I couldn't tell you.
But that was the reason. That was the difference maker. I didn't get the job because of that. And so I went back home, and I was a little down, whatever. But it was the first shot out, and I'd gotten to the final two, and so I felt good about that. And it wasn't very long after that I got a second call. And I had coached with Darryl Dickey, who was head football coach at North Texas at LSU. And he had said, hey, here's a guy you need to go look at. Here's a guy that I think would do a great job for you. And a quick funny story is that when I showed up for the interview, they flew me into the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. I walked into the hotel in there on the airport. And the first guy I saw was a guy named Randy Ross, who that time was at Alabama as an assistant, administrative type assistant. And I said, hey, what are you doing here? He said, I think probably the same thing you're doing here.
We're both interviewing.
And I said, oh, okay. Well, the two of us are interviewing. And he looked at me and he said, and so are those other 18 guys sitting over there. They brought 20 guys in at one time. Okay. Sitting in the same room, right? And I'm like, wow. So they bring me into this interview, and I'm in the room, and I just got there, and this guy walks out and says, Rick Villarreal. And I said, yes, me. He says, come on. And so we walk into the elevator, and it was so straightforward. Hey, listen, my name's Alan Ward, and I'm going to take you up to this interview. When you get off the elevator, go out the elevator, through the doors in front of you, sit in the chair, and don't say anything. Okay. And I just looked at him and said, this is a joke. Is this candid camera? I mean, this is a joke, right? And he said, no, this is what you need to do. So I walk into the room and walk into the doors. But, my mom brought me up different. So I walked in the door, your personality. And I said, hey, how are y'all doing today? I appreciate the opportunity. And the guy that was leading the committee, as a name that most everybody will know, was Gene Stallings at the time. And Coach Stallings was sitting down on one end of the table, and he said, hey, sit down. And I knew who he was, and I just kind of looked at him and said, wow, what did I do? And I sat down, and it just was quiet. Nobody said anything for about 20 seconds. And then he said, tell me why you think you ought to get this. What makes you qualify? I don't understand. I mean, I understand you're a football coach. I mean, you're a football coach. You guys didn't go to a bunch of bowl games when you were coaching, and, you only been administrative for 2 years. So what makes you qualify? I don't understand. Why do you think we should entrust you with this job at the University of North Texas? And it was like it just kept going for like 2 or 3 minutes. And then he said, so tell me, why? And I just sat there for a second, and I looked at him, and I said, Coach Stallings, let me say this. The University of North Texas may have the worst athletic program in the country right now, okay? You have no facilities. Your graduation rate's below 40%. You have women who are playing in public parks with some of them buying their own uniforms and part-time coaches. You have no national presence, and you have a Title IX problem, okay? So there's no real redeeming value to this program right now. So the guy you better hire better have somebody that's got thick skin and will put his head down and work hard, okay? I can do that. I have a proven record of doing that. I'm not going to be – maybe your comment was to intimidate me. You better hire somebody that can't be intimidated. Because if you hire somebody that's going to be intimidated, in 4 weeks you'll be hiring somebody else. So I'm just telling you that's not me. I'm not going to be intimidated. I'm confident in what I can do. I have a great background in business. I have a great background in managing people. I have a great background in athletics. I really have more backgrounds than most people you're going to be able to have. So if your intention was to intimidate me, it didn't work. And so I guess that's my answer.
Yeah.
He didn't say another word the whole time. He kind of sat back in his chair. There were some other people in the room. They just kind of looked at me, and a couple of them asked questions, and literally a bell went off. Ding!
Yeah,
that's your 20 minutes. It's up. You're done. Oh, it didn't matter if I was in the middle of an answer or what. 20 minutes. You're done. I get up and I walk back in the elevator, and Alan's there and said, "How did it go?" And I said, "Good luck with this circus. I have what are you guys doing? I have no clue. This is unbelievable." So I went down, and Randy was waiting on me at the airport. At the elevator, and he said, "How'd that go?" I said, 2 things. This is a circus. Just wait. You're not gonna believe it. And I said, secondly, I'm not getting this job. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I just pissed off Gene Stallings. I'm just telling you, I'm not getting this job. And so I leave. I get on my plane. I fly back to Jackson, Mississippi. And when I land, I get in my car. I have to drive back to Hattiesburg. It's about a 90-minute drive. And I get my phone and I call my wife. She said, well, hell, how'd it go? I said, it was really good. I said, no, not really. It was terrible. I said, I'm not getting this job. I said, the interview at UT San Antonio went great. This one, this is not going to happen. I'm not getting this job. She said, what happened? I said, I'll tell you when I get home. And you don't know who this guy is really, but I'm just going to tell you I'm not getting this job. And so as she says, well, don't worry about it. About that time, my phone, somebody rang in on my phone, and I looked at it, and it was a Texas number. I didn't have any idea who it was, but I said, let me take this. This is a Texas number. I don't know who it is. So I said, hello. And he said, Rick? And I said, yes. And he goes, this is Dr. Norval Pohl. And he had just become the president of the University of North Texas. Yeah. And he said, how are you doing today? And I said, well, probably not as good as you. And he said, well, I hope you're having a good day. And I said, well, Dr. Pohl, let me say this before you. I appreciate the opportunity. When I want to be an athletic director one day now, I know that. And so this is a great learning experience for me. It's going to help me continue to prepare for that job that I'm going to get one day. And it was not a wasted day. And it got real quiet. And he said, so you're not interested in this job? And I just I didn't know how to respond. Yeah. And then I said, have you talked to Gene Stallings? And he said, what do you mean? I said, you apparently haven't talked to Gene Stallings, because if you talked to Coach Stallings, I'm not getting this job. And he said to me, right after your interview, he called me and said, if you don't hire this guy, you're an idiot.
Is that right?
And I was shocked. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, that guy, he said, this guy will be able to overcome whatever it is, whatever you're dealing with. I'm not telling you he's gonna change the entire world, but he's gonna help your program overcome where it is right now. Yeah. And sure enough, they brought me back in for an interview with another guy, and it was really diverse, twosome. I don't want to say this guy wasn't thinking out of the box, but I'm a visionary. I always have been. I just think way outside the box, and I think about possibilities and not limitations. So when I went and interviewed, I blew away the coaches, blew away the student athletes, blew away everybody else in the group, and except for one guy. Dr. Thornton, who became a good friend, and he said, I voted against you. I said, we need to make sure we had somebody to save money, because we didn't have any money. And you're talking about spending all this money and building all these buildings. And but they brought me in. One of the things that was smart probably on their part is they brought me in the middle of the night. I didn't see any facilities.
So you didn't see the facilities?
No, I didn't see any facilities. Yeah. They didn't tell me we didn't have a baseball team. Yeah. It was just kind of like, and that was dumb on my part, right? And so I took the job. I left, and I was actually working at a softball game. We had a parents' weekend, and we were having a cookout, and I was cooking hamburgers and serving baked beans, and got a phone call from Dr. Pohl, and he said, hey, we want you to come be our athletic director. And I said, can you call me back? I'm right in the middle of a function. And he said, I'll do it. And so he called me back, and he said, I'd like you to be the athletic director, and we're going to offer you this much. And I said, well, I'm thinking about this much. And he goes, well, we're going to offer you this much. And I said, okay, and I'll take it. And so I did. And I came here, and, people ask me, knowing all of that, why did you take the North Texas job? if you knew they didn't have any facilities and you knew they hadn't won anything, I mean, they hadn't been to a bowl game in 50 years, hadn't been to the NCAA tournament in 20-something years. They didn't really have any teams that had any kind of success. They didn't have a budget. And why'd you take the job? And I said, I'm a big believer in the fact that if you're going to be at a university and you're going to recruit student athletes, you better have a great academic situation. Mm-hmm. I can't. It's hard to. Sometimes it's easy to sell parents on facilities and stuff, but most times a mom, they want to know what kind of degree they're going to get. Are they going to graduate? Are they going to, And for me, that was important. And I knew that North Texas had a respected academic program in several areas. And I said, we can fix athletics. I don't have the power to fix academics. Yeah. And so if I've got a strong academic program I can point to, then we can get this done. And there were some obstacles, some funny stories. The first staff meeting I went into, I asked my staff. I said, how many season tickets have we sold for? I got hired in April. Mm-hmm. I said, how many season tickets football have we sold so far? And they go, well, we haven't put in an application out yet. Most places I've been, we're putting out applications in January, and we hadn't put an application out. I said, oh my gosh, so I guess I should. Okay, well let me ask this. Tell me about tailgating. And they said, what do you mean? Yeah. And they said, what about your tailgating day, your game day stuff? And they go, you don't know. I said, I don't know what. And they said, well, tailgating is illegal at the University of North Texas. I thought it was a joke, right? I'm the new guy. Yes.
Yeah, sure.
They said, no, for real. For real. And they went and got the policy manual. I still remember this day. It was page 83, right in the middle of the page. Tailgating is illegal at the University of North Texas. I was shocked. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I'm coming from a Southeastern Conference background. I'd coached at LSU where tailgating is like a daily deal. Mm-hmm. And we had no tailgate. We had no game day atmosphere, nothing. Mm-hmm. So I called the president. I said, our meeting's over. I called Dr. Pohl. I said, Dr. Pohl, we need to have a call with the board right now. He said, for what? I said, we don't have tailgating here. It's illegal. He goes, God bless his soul. He said, what's tailgating? He had come from a bunch of academic institutions, right? So I said, Dr. Pohl, you really don't need to know. It doesn't really matter. We just got to have it. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to cost you anything. And so he did. He put together a call. That next day, the board got on the deal, and I said, well, you've got something in front of you here, and we need to pass this deal on tailgating. And so just kind of read what's in front of you. And they did. And I heard a couple of guys snicker. And I said, they know exactly why. Yeah. Right. And I said, tailgating is illegal. We have to change this rule today. Yeah. And we did. And, today you can go to a North Texas game and by no stretch of the imagination or where we need to be from a attendance or that kind of standpoint. But tailgating today is a festival. I mean, in fact, I'm now, after I retired, the guys that I made start tailgating when we instituted this, now I'm part of a crew that feeds about 400 people on Saturday, and it's just a big thing. So there were a couple of other obstacles, and you just have to believe in what you're doing. I told my staff that I was told that when I got the job, to fire everybody in sight, and just start over. And I walked into my first staff meeting, and Hank Dickinson and Mike Ashbaugh, who did a great job for me, and Brian Bethay, and some people didn't work out. But when I sat in that first meeting, I told them, they want me to fire every one of you. You guys understand that. They want me to let every one of you go. No, I'm not going to do that. You're going to fire yourselves. You're either going to get on board and we're going to bust it and we're going to do the things that need to be done, or you're going to fire yourself. That's up to you. You're not going to be able to handle it. A couple of weeks, two guys left. Both of them took other jobs, and one of them's a very dear friend, still lives in Denton and does a great job over at TWU. But they just, I don't know if they thought I was going to be real stern or I was real crazy, one of the two. But they didn't really want to be a part of that process. Yeah. And so, I think back now, 16 years later, 3 of those guys were still with me the entire time, and did unbelievable jobs of helping us move forward.
You mentioned those 16 years at North Texas. With your visionary style, the new stadium gets built, plenty of other facilities for a lot of the other teams, and just enormous upgrades across the way for the student athletes. You've always, as long as I've known you, I've seen this visionary, out of the box kind of mentality that you have. But it seemed to really manifest itself when you got the North Texas opportunity. But did you know all along that this is, if I ever get the chance, because of my upbringing, because of what I know I can do, that if I get a chance, I can show that I'm a visionary.
I knew that if I ever got the opportunity, I would make the most of it. I knew that I wasn't going to be worried about what was possible. I was going to tell people what I thought was possible. And it's really funny that the first season, we lose our first 5 football games. It's not great, whatever. And then we go on a run, and we win 6 games in a row. We win the conference. We end up going to the New Orleans Bowl. That most of these people had never been to a bowl game before in their lives at North Texas, and we put on one kind of party in New Orleans. We had a great time. But one of the things I wanted to do was, because we had so many people never been to a bowl game that were coming down, I had a company put together some boards for me to kind of show people visually what my vision was, what it was going to be. So we had this big posters with this big new stadium on it, big new athletic center, new tennis center, soccer complex. And you got to realize we didn't have any of these, zero of these. And so that night we had free food, and people came in, and I gave them a talk about what we were going to do. And we're going to build all these things and do all these things. And it was a great evening. People asked a lot of questions. And the next day we get beat 45 to whatever it was, 10 or 3 by Colorado State. Had a great quarterback that year. And I come home, and a friend of mine who remains to this day to be one of my best friends, David Anderson, he had gone that day. He was a guy that had followed football games when nobody else was going. And he and his wife had done a great job of supporting. But he came home, and his wife said, "Well, how'd it go?" And she said, "Well, he said, did you see the game? We got beat 45-3. And she goes, no, how did the rest of it go? I mean, what was the experience? And he goes, "I got to tell you this. We hired a clown. This guy has no clue. He thinks he's at Notre Dame. He thinks he's at Ohio State. He's going to build all these buildings and create all these funds and get these student athletes doing this. He has no clue where he is." And he said, later he told me that. I mean, later on he told me that. I made those comments, and, you're saying we're going to do all these things. And what's funny about what God puts in your heart, God puts on your mind to do. When we played Arkansas State that next year, I was on a bus. It was raining, and so after a game, they either give you a box of chicken or a pizza, one of the two, right? So we had a box of chicken, and I had a napkin. I had a couple of napkins, and so I was sitting there with a napkin, and I had a little felt tip pen, and I took my notebook out, and I started drawing up all this. We owned the old golf course across the street where the hotel was, and so I started drawing up. Here's where the stadium's going to go. We're going to put an athletic center here. We got this field next below this. We're going to put soccer over here and a track, and across the street, Liberty Christian was there at the time, but I'd already started talking to them because they were outgrowing their space and looking to sell. And I said, we could put softball field over here and a baseball field over here and a soccer facility where the old football stadium was, and we could do all these things. And it was all on this sheet. And so Richard Rafus, who was the vice president at that time, came on the bus and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Here, I want you to look at this. This is what we're going to do with the athletic complex." And he looked at it and just started laughing. And I said, "No, this is what we're going to do." And I got back and met with Dr. Pohl and said, "Dr. Pohl, this is what I want to do." And one thing I loved about Dr. Pohl was he knew what he didn't know. He said, "You take care of athletics. You let me know how I can help you." And he did. And so, even though you say I couldn't give you money for this, he supported just about everything that I did.
Right.
And, what's amazing today, I know that vision didn't come from me. I know that was a vision that was a plan way ahead of whenever I got there that God had put together and said, "We're going to do this, and we're going to benefit young people." And today, it's crazy, but that actual napkin is exactly where everything is.
Exactly
where it was going to be, except the soccer field's in the middle of the track. But it did go in initially in the old football field, and everything that we said we were going to do, we ended up getting done. And again, that goes back to just our parents providing great confidence in us. That don't always be confident in what you do. Don't ever think that it's not possible. You're going to fail. I mean, there were some things I did people didn't like. When it got to the end of my career, they were flying a plane over the stadium saying, "Hey, fire Rick," because we weren't in enough games. And I'm trying to think, well, wait a minute. When we got here, you'd won 16 games, basketball games in 4 years, and you'd won like 3 football games. I mean, what was the expectation? But I also understand that, when you get on a pedestal sometimes, the same people that are giving you a plaque 5 years earlier are flying a plane, right? And so the more you're up on a pedestal and the expectations are, the greater the opportunity or the greater that it's going to happen. I mean, it's just a greater chance that it's going to happen, that you're going to fall, that you're going to tumble, right? Because you lose your fan base. I mean, every coach will tell you this. No matter who it is, maybe Nick Saban's different. I don't know, but everybody else, you lose about 5% of your fans every year because you don't win. You don't win all the games anymore, and you don't build all the buildings and you don't do all these other things. And so what you create as expectations become hard to kind of live up to.
How do you keep your vision and your positivity? You look back at your career, you get let go a couple of times, and you're, at North Texas, great successes in doing things, but then, you always face like opposition with like any job. But what do you lean back on that a lot of people can think, wow, that's a good outlook to have with the opposition or adversity that you've faced?
Well, it starts with having a great partner in life.
Yeah.
We kid all the time. Greg Johnson and I call my wife Sancta Lynn because, this is a lady that in 5 years we moved 7 times.
Yeah.
Different jobs, different houses. I say we had 7 houses in 5 years. At one time we owned 3 at the same time because of movements and jobs and those kind of things. And but she's always been a woman of great faith. From day one, she's never wavered from. That's where our success comes from. That's where our life comes from. And so, as a coach, I truly believe coaches' wives already have a place in heaven because those that support and stand by and do the things that are necessary to keep a family together, they're incredible in that support system. But the other, I think, you can. It's the half glass, glass half full, half empty. You can take whatever approach you want to. I could sit in my office every day and just go, oh my gosh, I got to worry about this. We got to do that. Mm-hmm. No, I just think that when you stay positive, and one of the things that I used to do every day that I would encourage every boss to do, and maybe I wasn't great at everything. I had my disagreements with people, but I used to always try to walk around the office and go, what can I do to help you today? That was the first thing. What can I do to help you, right? Because now you're invested in them. And you can't make it fake. They need to know, okay, if I need you to do this, then you're going to do it. Mm-hmm. But what happens is they go, no, most of the time they go, I got it. We got it taken care of. And then they'll say, what can I do to help you, right? And so that ability to work together grows, and it makes all those things possible. And it's like I told everybody, when I left after 16 years, a lot of those people got let go. Yeah. When you get a new regime in, and they wanted their own people, and a lot of people did great jobs that it wouldn't be possible to be where it is today. Got let go, and they kind of were sour about it. And I said, no, let me just explain something to you. I want you to look back 16 years ago, and I want you to see where this university program was and these facilities ever. But more importantly, I want you to see where student athletes were. Now, you tell me if student athletes were better off 16 years later because of what you did, because of what we did, because of the programming, because of the facilities, because of the budgets, because of everything else we did, were they better off? And if they are, guess what? You were totally successful. So don't look at it as negative. And I just think that you can beat yourself down by doing that. But it doesn't take a lot more energy to be positive.
No, you're one of the most active persons I know in retirement. If that is even such a word, I don't know if you accept that or not. But I know one of your real passions, and you talked about it when you were at LSU, is the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and you're very involved in the Greater Denton County FCA as well as I am, but in a big leadership role. What is it about that you saw early on and continue now these many years later, how FCA can affect a young person, how they can get on campus and affect lives of student athletes or just students that are on campus?
I'm a big believer that my responsibility in life is to get my family to heaven. That's it. We can sometimes think it's about us, but it's really not. It's about your family and what you need to do to make sure they get to heaven. And so when you model that and all of a sudden 1,000 student athletes become your family, and that's what they are. There's a big movement at Ohio State this past year where 4 or 5 young men, very deep in their faith, said, "We're going to change this football team. We're going to immerse ourselves." And by the end of the year, there were a large majority of the team was involved in the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and they actually put on an event on campus to give their testimonies, and thousands of people showed up that night. I mean, not just student athletes, students, community people showed up, and 1,000 people gave their lives to Christ that night. And so for me, I know that nothing is there except Christ for us. That's it. The old joke is, you don't ever see a U-Haul at the end of a funeral line, right? You can't take that stuff with you.
Yeah.
You just can't, right? So and in the Bible says, you need to give up your brother and you need to give up your wife, and that's not a bad thing. That's not what they're saying. Your concentration has to be is that He controls your life, right? An important thing to remember is you didn't choose Him; He chose you.
That's right.
Right, and so I know that a lot of these kids have been chosen. They've all been chosen, right? But we need to find an outlet to get them to Christ, right? We live in a world today that's got a lot of evil's not the right word. I don't like, but it is evil to a degree. But there's just a lot of conflicting ideas and things that just don't make any sense. And what I want to try to do through FCA is bring back to young people. Not this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
That's not my job. My job is not to tell you what to do. My job is to say, hey, pick up that Bible and read it because it tells you everything you need to know about life. Okay, what your relationships should be like, what your life should be like, what your job should be like. It tells you everything that it should be. And so when you have people who have those moral fibers, right? And some people, they're going to take a lot of abuse.
Yeah.
The one thing I try to tell young people we talk to them is, 11 of the 12 apostles, they were martyred. I mean, that's how it was. You got to be willing to give up your life, right? So it's not going to be popular sometimes. But the more the surge continues, then the easier it becomes. Now, that's a good and a bad thing because we don't want it to be easy. It needs to be a continuing growth. I'm 68 years old, almost 68 years old, and I'm still growing in my faith every day, right? But I just believe we have the ability with ability to raise money, ability to create awareness, to be able to provide these young people with a path, with just a conduit to other people who have faith, and to be a conduit to other young people to bring them to that faith, because we're going to live in a better world. God really only had 2 commandments at the end of the day, and one of them was love one another as yourself, right? And so if we truly did that, we wouldn't have war. We wouldn't have problems in this country. We wouldn't be arguing as Republicans or Democrats or whatever it might be. We would be taking care of each other, right? And that's what I want to try to help develop. But I have 7 grandkids, and every day I do that with them. I try to teach them to be respectful of others. Not that you have to accept everything that everybody else is, but you love them. You're not their judge. And through FCA, I believe we can. We provide not only Bibles and meetings and those kind of things, but we provide support. And so this was a blessing for me. Right before I got into this, I was running a Catholic youth camp out in East Texas 5 years. And, we grew from 1,600 campers my first year in reaching out to 3,000 kids. And now we can't take all the kids that want to come to camp. And I saw the life-changing things that happen at places like that. And it happens in our communities too. And FCA, everybody can help. That's the one thing about FCA. You don't have to believe in this or that. If you just believe in young people and you want to see them do well, it's a place where you can help.
Which I know that in retirement, I can't see you just sitting around. Well, I could see you. I was going to say sitting around playing golf, but I know you love to sit around and play golf, and you play a lot of golf. But you were one that would have to have purpose, and it seems like you have found real purpose after your professional career with this, not only in reaching the student athletes, but I know for a fact that you're, like you just said, finding people in the community, men and women who can come alongside these student athletes and help as well. And it seems like that is your course now.
Well, and I also believe this. We're reading a Bible devotional reading the other day, and it said, "Listen to young people," right? Because the reality is, we can grow from young people. When we think we're bigger than, or older, or stronger than young people, the Bible says we should believe as a child, right? So in that process of giving information and support, we get information and support. We get a growth in our own faith, right? So the investment you make as a supporter, a volunteer, or on the board is going to come back to you 100-fold, because it's going to help you see your clear path to what you should be doing, to what you really should be in your life. And, again, if you ever I've been at a real dark place in my life. 2007 was probably the worst year of my life. I had to fire a football coach who was a dear friend, and I hated to do that, but I had to hire a women's basketball coach who had been at the university for years. I had to make some changes. I had a son that got his girlfriend pregnant, ended up getting married. They found a lump in my throat, thought it was cancer, and it wasn't. But there were like 5 things going on in 6 months, and then we got a new president, and she was told that she needed to fire me, and I was at a place where I actually went to a restaurant one night and We were ordering dinner. My wife ordered, and she looked at me and she said, "What are you going to get?" And I was shaking. I said, "I can't order anything," because I was trying to figure out how I was going to pay for it. I was trying to figure out how I was going to survive the next 6 months without a job, and that's the night that he took really hold of me and said, "Hey, you're going to be okay. You know, you're going to be fine. You just, if you're that lacking in your faith, then we got to back up." And he did. I mean, and it just turned into a lot of. I mean, it was when I fired my football coach. I was trying to hire another football coach, and just quick again. The first guy that I wanted to hire, I called him. He said, "Well, I'll take the job, but I need to make this much money." And I said, "Okay." And so I went to my president and said, "I need another $150,000 to pay this football coach." He said, "No, you're not getting that. That'd be more money than I'm making." And I wasn't joking, but I said, "Well, he's got a harder job than you."
Yeah.
You know. And so she said, "I'm not giving it to you." So I had to call Jimbo Fisher, who was at LSU at the time, and say, "I can't hire you." Okay.
Wow.
So, all right. So the second guy I called a guy out in California that I had been following and, was doing a great job out there. And I called him and he flew in. I interviewed him. He went through the new athletic center. He was all jacked up and he said, "I'm going to take the job." And I went home and told my wife, I said, "Hey, we're going to change the program. I just hired a guy that's going to change this program totally." And but before he left, he said, "I got to tell you one thing. I'm engaged to a young lady. We live together. We're not married. Is that a problem?" I said, "Well, if this was 1970, it probably would be." And he said, "Well, now we're getting married in a couple months. It's already planned." I said, "I can handle that part of it." And he said, "Okay, let me go and I'll call you back." So he left and I'm all jacked up, ready to go. And 2 days later, he called me and said, "Coach, we got a problem." I said, "Oh, your fiance doesn't want to move to Texas." And he said, "No, that's not the problem." I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He goes, "I'm interviewing at Stanford tomorrow. Jim Harbaugh."
Jim Harbaugh.
Jim Harbaugh. I mean, we were this close to hiring Jim Harbaugh, right? And if Stanford had not had an opening, he'd have been at the University of North Texas. That same year, when I hired a women's basketball coach, I had interviewed a gentleman and a lady, and my president, not a problem, but she said she wanted a woman because I had hired other men coaches to coach women's teams, and my belief was you always give those girls the best coach. It's not a female coach, it's not a white coach, not a black coach, not a male coach. It's the best coach. I need the best coach for my kids, right? And so I had brought a gentleman in, and she basically told me I wasn't hiring a gentleman. She was going to hire a lady, and so we did. We hired a lady. We had to fire her 2.5 years later. The guy that I didn't hire was a guy that was at Texas A&M who ended up going to Mississippi State, went to the Final Four 3 years, and now is the head coach of Texas. So that was a year that was crazy, right?
Wow.
And I could have just said, "Hey, you're not with me. I'm not having to do this all." No, it was just, I gained tremendous strength from that year that you can overcome anything. You can literally overcome and prosper. 3 years later, we open a stadium.
You did. Well, your story is your life is an inspiration and it's a motivation, and I thank you for sharing it with us.
Oh, listen, I'm glad to be a part of it, and if it touches one person that helps them strengthen their lives, get through a day, then I'm just happy to be able to do it.
Thanks for being here, Rick.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of Built for This. Be sure to follow Built for This on your favorite listening platform and share it with a friend. Join me on the next episode when I will share entertaining stories of inspiration, encouragement, and purpose-driven experiences. What are you built for? Built for This is produced and recorded by Heart Media DFW.